and welcome to the latest video here on the Britpop Buzz YouTube channel. Now this week I had the great pleasure of speaking with Simon Parker, the co-founder and owner of Naked Record Club. He explains how they was able to secure the deal and able to release one of the latest Cure albums, and that is the November Live in France 2022 record. This was released by the Naked Record Club not long before the release of the latest album. We also had a little talk about his 90s music he was involved with. He was involved in 3 indie bands spanning from the late 80s all the way up to the late 90s. So he has got a wealth of knowledge, and he talks about everything he was involved with throughout the 90s. But before we get into that, I just want to say, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also give the channel a thumbs up and leave any comments and all them things that help the channel get noticed. So sit back, I hope you've got a nice hot cup of tea, and I hope you enjoyed the interview. All right, Simon. I'm
all
followed
good,
you for a long time now online, and you seem to be busy on time.
Yeah, I mean, we've been. You mean with Naked?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it took a massive step up with The Cure.
Yeah.
That was just absolutely crazy. You know, we'd done 6 before then, which were it was kind of building, and then we got to The Cure, and it just exploded because we had to make 5,000 records. We've only ever made I think we made 700 for Stars, and everything else was like 500s and pretty manageable.
Yeah.
But with The Cure, we made 5,000, and they all sold in 2 hours. It was just incredible, you know. And it's getting really good reviews because it sounds great. This really is a new way of making records, and yeah, I mean, we've been working on it for a long time. We didn't come up with the idea, but we've been one of the first kind of adopters, and we've worked pretty closely with the people over in the Netherlands who came up with it. It's like a factory where they make these records, and at the moment there's still only 2 machines in the world, and we're getting to use one, which is amazing, really. So that's kind of, you know, Robert Smith kind of. I sent a couple of emails, and then somebody from the Cure Italia shared an interview that I did start of the year with Record Collector, and so I just said I'd give body parts to work with The Cure, and it kind of happened. So yeah.
Well, that's like a mad dream come true story, isn't it? You've done an article, and then they get back to you, and it's all happening.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they've been my favourite band for about 40 years. I mean, I love a lot of music, but The Cure have always been a constant for me since, well, probably before. But I remember the album that I really, really loved was Head on the Door in 1985. You know, I was a teenager, and it meant a lot. I mean, I grew up in a town where nothing ever happened. Nothing ever really was going to happen. There wasn't anybody to be in a band with. And I wanted to be in a band since I was at school. You know, yeah. I wasn't doing a very good job of learning how to play an instrument. I hadn't kind of thought it through very well, but that's kind of where it all started, really, for me. When I bought that album, I kind of started getting my act together a little bit and started to find people who like the same sort of music. So yeah, The Cure for me has just been always there, you know, always there. So this was a dream come true, really.
And so you run Naked Record. The Naked Record Company, making the records and everything. It sounds like you've had to. It's basically you've had to like double your output for this Cure album. Like you've got 2 record plants going at once when you used to having one. It's tripled what your volume.
Yeah, I mean, we've only used the one factory because there is 2 machines, but they're not linked. They're owned by different companies in different countries. So we're still using the one that we've been using all along. We've made 3 records with them to date, which was the Stars record, Tahiti 80, and then The Cure. But we did 10 times as many records. You know, we went from 500 to 5,000. So it was amazing. A big undertaking. So you know, and we're still working on it now. I mean, the record came out 1st of October, but the nature of making 5,000 records is it's a huge thing, you know. So yeah, we're still doing it, but it's just great. It's kind of put us into the spotlight a bit. I think, you know, we're getting there's other artists who now want to work with us. We've had some meetings with record companies as well. So it's all, it's all starting to happen, I think, at this point.
That's really good news. That it's opened that doors for you and
Yeah,
bringing people in. Yeah,
absolutely.
great to hear. Yeah, and it
Great.
must feel like, oh, do you feel like you've made it sort of as a record company now, or
Well, we don't. I mean, it's a good question, but we don't even really. We don't see ourselves as a record company. We didn't set up to be a record company. We don't sign bands.
no?
We sign licenses to make records, or if the artist owns all their masters or their own rights, then we just do a 50-50 deal. And we based that on what Factory Records used to do, because Factory is one of my favorite record labels. Factory and Creation were two, brilliant labels that were probably not run always in the most streamlined way, but everybody looked like they had a lot of fun. So that was it. So we're not a record company. I mean, it's something that might come up later on, and we do want to work with newer bands as well. I mean, at the moment, we've obviously The Cure was at two new songs that had never been out before, live versions of two tracks on the new album, which comes out later this week. So that was kind of new to an extent, and everything else has really been either a reissue or something that's never been on vinyl before, like the Baby Bird album that we started with. He had a whole bunch of songs on his Bandcamp page under the kind of King of Nothing banner. And then he let us choose the ones that we thought would sit really nicely. And we put out a record based around his Bandcamp page, really, for that record. And yeah, that's great. But yeah, I mean, we feel we're getting there. And of course, the main thing, David, is that it's eco. We're trying to get some sustainability into vinyl records. I have, a house full of vinyl records. I absolutely bloody love them and bought them since, I was about 11 years old. So I don't want to sort of ruin anybody's fun with vinyl. But Rachel, my partner, and I took a look at it during COVID and said, wow, never realized quite how bad for the environment records were and are. They take 1,000 years to biodegrade.
Really? That's
Yeah, I mean,
a
they
thousand
just.
years. Because people talk about carrier bags in landfills and stuff taking thousands of years to break down and decompose, but the way vinyl is at the minute, and it's massive again now. No one
Yeah.
talks about it, and what you're doing is amazing. It's great.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, and it's not always, because I mean, obviously, vinyl is made from PVC, so that's polyvinyl chloride.
Yeah.
Chloride's really toxic, and it's, when it's in factories and being made into records, it's really, really, really toxic. But the other thing that we've got with Naked is that traditional records are made with a steam process. So a factory will boil water 24/7, 7 days a week, to create enough steam to press these records into a shape. With us, we use something out of injection molding, and it uses hardly any water or electricity. So it also saves a hell of a lot of energy. So with where we are at the moment with climate change and problems with finding new sources of power, these records are, we just think it's the future, really. We really do. We've even done away with those the paper middles.
Oh, have you?
We're actually directly printing onto the record now.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
and it looks great, and most people don't even know. I've had to
Oh,
point
yeah.
it out to most people. Say, have a look at this, tell me what you think's different. And 9 times out of 10, people don't get it. And it's only really when you touch it, you go, oh, yeah, it's not paper, is it? It's just straight on. So, for us, we're really excited about this. And as I say, now we just need to choose a few more records to put out and keep in the spotlight as much as we can, I guess.
The way you've just explained it to me, you don't see because I've watched videos of records being made online, and you see them put the paper on the bit of PVC, and then the press comes down. It doesn't explain to you the water bit you just said being constantly boiling to do. It doesn't tell you that that's happening. So I didn't know until you just told me that happens.
Yeah, I mean, we had to dig deep on a lot of this stuff when we first started looking. It's not really very well known, and I think that might be for a reason, because it is, think about it, David, that these records, Columbia, records changed from shellac to sort of like the earliest forms of PVC in 1948. And not that much has changed. Obviously, the machines have changed and got newer over the years and, you know, sort of been improved. But the actual principle itself was really old technology now. 1948 was when these records replaced shellac. So it's, yeah, there's a lot. When you start looking, there's a lot there. And, you know, we know it can't change overnight. We wouldn't want to stop anybody from getting a record. But what we think is that to have an option, at the moment you have many different, you know, when a record gets released, it's probably going to be on what, 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 different colors. So we're saying, rather than just do them all in different color, do an eco option as well.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 colors, some sort of special deal with t-shirts and CDs and whatever, you know, which everyone sort of does, and then have an eco version as well. And you know, we're putting ourselves forward, especially to indie bands, because that's my heart, you know. And of course that ties in with your Britpop fetish very nicely as well. So you know, that's where I started, and that's where I still am, really. You know, I wouldn't profess I love soul music, but I don't know that much about it. The thing that I really know is indies, and that's kind of where I think we'll sort of just try and stay working with indie bands for as long as we can.
That sounds really good. I just want to touch upon, you've mentioned you started buying records really early on.
Yeah.
You have a considerably large record collection yourself then, Simon?
Yeah, I do. I have about 2,500 albums, but I probably have 3,000 or 4,000 singles, because when I started, I could only afford to buy singles.
Yeah.
But it was lucky, because being as old as I am, I was 11 in about 1979, 78, 79. And for me, 1979 was a brilliant year. You know, there was still, punk had kind of gone, and it was being replaced with new wave, Joy Division. There was something, you know, to me, 79 was brilliant. And I was only 11, so I was listening to things like Blondie and the Police. And I still think they're great. I'm not a big fan of Sting, but, you know, it was like, as an 11-year-old walking into a record shop, I remember I used to buy those Squeeze singles, because they were on different, they always would release them on a different color. Every single got released on a different color vinyl. So I started buying what are probably quite collectible records quite early doors. XTC were my favorite band when I just went to secondary school. Loved all their stuff. And I really started with 7 inches, and then probably for my birthday or Christmases, I'd ask for some, you know, albums. And that's when I, you know, first started getting a few albums as well. So yeah, I've got great memories of buying records. It's weird, really. If I pick any random single out of my collection, 9 times out of 10, I'll kind of remember where I was when I bought it, which is a bit weird. But I think vinyl has that. You don't have it with a CD, but I think you do have it with vinyl record, or a lot of people seem to have that with vinyl records. You kind of, you touch it and you're just like, oh yeah, I remember this. I got this, you know, somewhere.
I remember, I can't remember if it was like last New Year or last Christmas, you was doing the countdown and holding up your favorites online, and you was counting down. I can't remember if it was New Year or Christmas, and you went through about 10 or 15. Would that still be the same now? If I'm asking you, would your favorites be the same now as then?
If I'm honest, it's been a really busy year, and although I remember doing it, it probably would shift a little bit. Funnily enough, the one I remember just popped into my head when you said it was the Ash single. Yeah. And that, you know, was absolutely Girl from Mars, wasn't it? It wasn't Kung Fu, it was Girl from Mars. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think my top singles, they shift about a little bit, but yeah, that kind of indie strain of things is where I'll always be at with those. And I DJ sometimes, because currently live in France, and I get DJ jobs every now and again when they want an English DJ. And I DJ'd an Irish bar for New Year's last couple of years. So I've done that all from vinyl. And that's just, for me, you know, a heavenly night. I can take out loads of singles, albums, and just play. And, you know, the French have a really good, they love English music
Right.
of a certain time, and you take it if you got it in on 7-inch or on an album or something. It's like people just come up and you know, a lot of people who are buying vinyl now don't really have a concept of the 7-inch single because
No.
they're buying albums. 7-inch singles are just so ridiculously expensive these days that they're not consumed in the same way. I mean, I used to buy them. I think probably I'd get them when they were in the, you know, in the discount bins as well. But I think I remember buying singles when they were 99p or 79p, and you could do that. You know, you could go out and buy 3 or 4 at a time, or if you had more money, you'd spend a lot more on them as well. And that's how I got things like Oasis and Blur. All those records were back in the, you know, and that's moving forward from going right through the 80s into the 90s, obviously. But you could, in the mid 90s, week of release, you could go and buy all those fantastic Britpop things at the very most, probably 1.99, you know, and a lot of them were 99p. And it was just, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
You
that was
can't buy
good.
them at that price now. You can't.
Oh, no, I've looked at the price of the Oasis ones online. I mean, singles are, what, 50, 100 quid each as well. And of course, the albums, original creation copies of the albums are just hundreds and hundreds. So yeah, it's cool. It's good though. It's good to know that indie is that collectible and is worth something, you know, because it got quite derided in the early 2000s. There's this thing about indie landfill because there was a lot of indie bands around, and that always used to really piss me off, and it still does actually. But I didn't subscribe to indie landfill at all. But so it's really, really good when, you know, we're looking back now to the mid to late 90s and realizing that it was actually a brilliant time. You know, it really was an amazing time.
It was a special time, especially for British music. It exploded at that time. Now, going back to the 90s, till you messaged me, I knew you was in 2 bands, but you was in 3 different bands from like the start of the 90s to the end of the 90s, and there was all in like 3 different sort of indie time frames. The beginning of the 90s where you was sort of like Manchester, sorry, shoegaze and indie. Then you had Britpop in the middle. Then you had the bit at the end that was sort of like post Britpop with Travis and Embrace, was sort of a bit sadder and stuff. I've not had a chance to listen to all music.
Don't worry,
the whole time.
I don't expect you to.
But did it all sound? Was it all the same, or did you transcend it through the 90s as it changed? Or
yeah, I mean, it changed. It definitely changed. So just 1990 was where I really had my first band, what I'd call my college band, and that was the Violet Trade, and we just had a great time. It was a bit like with slightly less drugs. I'd say slightly, but it was a bit like a Happy Mondays vibe. Our gigs were always really, they're events. You know, we had DJs.
Yeah.
It was that time when there was that sort of crossover between DJs and bands. Obviously, Primal Scream were doing it. Happy Mondays were obviously doing it. And we were down the other end of the country. You know, I grew up near Brighton, really, in a small town called Chichester. And believe me, there was nothing going on. But we took over a pub. And because so many people would come for the DJ set as much as our band, you know, we could get 200 people, 250 people on a Saturday night into a room. And we took it over. And so that was brilliant. So that band, Violet Trade, turned into Colour Burst because most of the guys in Violet Trade didn't want to leave Chichester. They were happy. That was kind of enough for them. So I left Chichester and moved to Brighton, which is obviously, like, you know, the music capital of the south of England. And it was then, and it still remains it to this day. So when I moved there, it was a case of shoegaze was in full swing. I was really into Boo Radley's The Giant Steps album.
Yeah.
I really liked Slow Dive, loved Ride, and that kind of affected the songwriting. And I think up until that point, maybe we were a little bit behind, and then something happened and we just found our own thing. And it happened when I took over singing in Colour Burst, which I know is a band that you own one of the 7-inch singles of, because we obviously made two 7-inch singles in 95 and 96. And yeah, I was quite surprised. I don't know where you found it, but
It
Good
was
gig.
it was on eBay. I got it, and they are on
Was it?
a couple on eBay, and there's a couple on Discogs. Yeah,
Right.
and Colourburst. It's one of them bands. I don't. You only released them 2 7-inch singles.
Yeah.
How come? Is there a reason why nothing else was made, or nothing got put on CD, or?
We made loads of demos. I mean, do you know what? I mean, even up to 95, 96, the technology wasn't there to burn CDs that
Yeah,
easily.
yeah.
You really, and we didn't have that much money, and the studios we were using might not have had that technology. You know, here you go, lads, it's a cassette. And then you've got a master, but it's on cassette. And this is years before you could sort of mix and match things and EQ things properly. You could do it, but I mean, no one had the computers to do it or the software to do it back then. So we would write and rehearse a lot, which set us apart from a lot of Brighton bands who were just really lazy. But we weren't. We really maybe 3 times a week would rehearse, and we'd be trying out new songs. Most rehearsals there'd be a new idea kicking about. And by, I guess really but by the time I took over singing, because we had 2 different singers in Colourburst before I sang, but I was kind of writing more and more, and we had trouble with singers. We did play a memorable night in Manchester. Do you remember something called In the City, which used to happen?
I think I've seen it advertised on old flyers and in old
Yeah.
Yeah,
It would be that. It was again, that was to do with Tony Wilson and probably Factory, I guess, to a lesser extent, because he kind of rebooted Factory after it closed the first time. But what In the City was fantastic. It was once a year in September, loads of up and coming indie bands would descend on Manchester. It's rather like what's that thing in Brighton now, The Great Escape, where you have hundreds of bands coming over. Yeah. Well, In the City was the precursor to that, and we were invited to play it with Colourburst, with our singer at the time. So I was just still playing bass then, and you know, the year we played, there was who was it? I know Space Maid played, and I've seen that you're a fan of the Baby Come On single, which I think is a brilliant single. Yeah. And then there was bands like Salad. Did Deus do the one we did? Gene. I'm missing some of the bigger bands that did it as well that year. But it was basically Gorky's did it, the Welsh band. There was literally hundreds of rising bands got to play around Manchester, and Colourburst got invited to do it, and we had a shocker. We had one of those gigs where it went completely wrong, and so we parted company with the singer after that gig. It wasn't his fault. We all had a bad gig, but it happened. And then we just stayed as a 3-piece, and I took over singing, and that's when things started to happen, because the music, the tastes were changing, and by early '95, Britpop was really in place. You know, it probably started, I think, with the Auteurs, Suede, and then definitely the Blur Modern Life is Rubbish album, I'd say, was a real, sea change, and bands wanted to sound like that. And then, of course, you get into Part Life and Definitely Maybe. And we were just in the right place at the right time, really, and things kind of took off. We got a little indie deal. We stuck out the first single on our own, actually, and then we got someone who wanted to work with us and put some money in for the second single, the Girl Fell Out of the Radio. And it was just a brilliant time for indie. People were going out to gigs. We would play gigs all around the country. There was always people there, even though we had minimal money for marketing or even telling people. It was just great, really positive. I remember the whole music scene was so positive. And the record companies were just falling over themselves to sign indie bands. It was it really was a truly great time.
Your band is one of them bands I always look for, because you're right in what you're saying. There was indie bands all over, and money was flat. Was trying to sign everyone. Your band is one of them ones where I like to find, and you only produced one single, so I want to have that single, and I want to have it here in my collection, so then people can come around and go, oh, I know this looks similar to many other people's up and down the country, but I can guarantee I can pick up an album off the bottom. No one else has got it. I have
Yeah.
it. It's there from a Scottish. That one I pointed to is from a Scottish band called Splendid, who did nothing at all. Self-produced album. And I found it on eBay one day. Took a blind punt on it. You can't
And
buy
it's
all
great,
this
is it?
stuff.
I don't know that name. I know
No.
quite a lot of the smaller ones. We probably played gigs with a lot of them, but Splendid, I don't remember.
Speaking of gigs, Simon,
Yeah,
do you remember being in many fanzines?
they were definitely happening at the time. I remember doing a few interviews, probably not as many as some bands, but yeah. Why? What did you
I
find?
don't have an interview, but I do have a review of one of your gigs in this fanzine from 1994. It's called All About Dee and Friends, and I've got a review of one of your gigs here with a band called Idol, and this is at the King's
Right, okay.
Arms in Fulham, 10th of the 9th, 1994.
Okay.
I'm going to read out the full thing and see what you think. So it goes, the opening band were already on stage when I arrived. It doesn't say who wrote the review,
Okay.
but Idol, for it is they, have jazzy bits, the penultimate song in particular, and funkish bits as well, as lots of rocky bits. Paul the singer has an excellent voice, nice tunes, good stage presence, and loads of passion. The talented, beanie-clad guitarist is almost in a world of his own, barely communicating with the rest of the band. Having said that, they hardly live up to their name, as their sound is very tight, very polished. Listen out for them. John is very much the front man of Colourburst. So I think 94, this must be
that was with John the second. Yeah, John was the second singer who we played in the city with. He was a great front man.
Attired in a three-piece suit, seemingly miles too big for him. He throws himself into his songs with huge amounts of verve and physical exertion. They make a harder, punkier sound live than I was expecting from the demos. The single Bender is not one of their strongest tracks, but their penultimate song is one of my favourites. I wasn't invited. In an excellent week for gigs, they couldn't possibly top Create or Finn, but they pick up a credible bronze, well ahead of Catatonia and Manta Ray.
Well, that's pretty good. We supported Catatonia, funnily enough, a few months later. But that I've never seen that. Well found.
I've had that a while. And it makes, especially talking about the bands at the end there, Create, Finn, Catatonia and Manta Ray. Catatonia must have been very early on in their career then when you've been mentioned with them. But yeah.
Yeah, when we supported him, I think they were just about to put their album out. They toured with, do you remember 60 Foot Dolls?
Yeah.
And we were the first band on. That was Brighton. We were like the local support for that one. And yeah, there was 60 Foot Dolls in Catatonia. I mean, it was a great night. 60 Foot Dolls, what was that song? Pig Valentine. I mean, that was a brilliant single. And Catatonia, yeah, I always had a bit of a soft spot for them. And Keris was in her wilder days then, and would never say no to a drink. So yeah, it was good. Again, that's what I'm saying. It was just virtually any bill you ended up on would be a great gig. I don't have memories of really shit gigs. Unfortunately, the In the City gig with John, who you've just been reading about, didn't go very well, but we just had one of those nights. But it was a very intense band. That lineup only lasted 8 months and it felt like 8 years. It was really, and that's why we were like that on stage. That's why the music sounded particularly heavy. The songs were all really short. It was just like these sort of bursts, sorry about the pun, but these bursts of sort of frenzied pop punk. But we always had choruses. So, there was always something people could kind of like hang on to, even if it was going at 200 miles an hour. So, they were wrong about Bender, though. That was actually one of our best songs. So they got that wrong. These are all up on Bandcamp, I think, now. I think most.
You're right. Yeah, we've got all your stuff on Bandcamp. Um, Before you've probably seen the timer's going to come up saying there's only like 5 or 10 minutes left, Simon. But
Right.
I just wanted to ask you, you sort of already have mentioned it before. Who were your favourite bands back in the 90s? And you was in a band yourself going through that time, but did you have any core bands who you sort of followed like religiously and listened to at the time?
Yeah, I did. I mean, but they didn't really affect the songwriting that much. The Cure would be one from our earlier conversation, but we didn't sound like the Cure at that point of the Britpop years. I always loved Trashcan Sinatra, still do. Scottish band I just absolutely adored, and I love them from about 1990. Saw them many times. Obviously, Pulp, Blur, Oasis, all the all the big bands, Elastica, Gene. I always had a real soft spot for Gene. I really love their first two albums in particular. Long Pigs, really like
Yeah.
Long Pigs. That might be 96, 97, but that first album is pretty untouchable. God, you get asked these questions and you just go completely blank. Yeah, all these bands. Who did I listen to my singles of? There was a lot of British stuff. I think this was a reaction to grunge had been force fed to us lot indie kids in 91, 92. And, Nirvana, fantastic. And there was other great bands as well. But by about 93, 94, it was just basically, I just thought it sounded like really bad heavy metal bands dressed up as the voice of rebellion coming out of America. And of course, the reaction in the UK, spearheaded by Blur, was just like a big fuck you to grunge. That's what I always saw. And I love that. So yeah, my heart was really with British bands, and I still can't remember anybody else at this point. But yeah, lots. So I always loved Lawrence Denham.
He's
Guy
still going strong, bless him. Lawrence is. He's still going.
Yes.
Yeah.
That actually both the Denham albums were just wonderful. I've mentioned the Boo Radleys. There's a few American bands. I suppose I like Weezer. I always quite liked Weezer, actually. I thought they were, the first couple of albums, the second one in particular, I thought was really, really great. And they were kind of early 90s, and then they disappeared for a while. I can see some of my records here. I'm trying to cheat and find things out. Ash, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely adored Ash. They were a three-piece, so Colourburst in our prime were a three-piece. So, I gravitated quite a lot towards them. But, yeah, I don't know. David, you hold the record up. I probably loved it or got it, so, yeah.
But I agree with you that Long Pigs debut album is untouchable. For me, that's probably the best album of the 90s, that Long Pigs one.
Wow.
For me, it is. When I think about it, it's definitely in my top 5.
Yeah.
It's there.
It's fantastic. And they were really, really, really good. So quality Britpops. That's what I liked.
Yeah. All right, Simon. I've just got one more question for you, if that's all right. You've had such a long career in music, like your whole life.
Yes.
If you went all the way back to the start and you wasn't involved in music, what do you think your career would you have had? Could you see what you would have done?
I occasionally think about this because I still find it remarkable that I have spent my whole life in music when I didn't sell millions of records. It's the doors have always opened up as I've gone along. And I think, it's a bit of a cheat. I reckon I'd have been a music journalist. I would probably have tried just a little bit harder in the sixth form because I just didn't even bother going in my school in the sixth form. Basically, I went to a boys' school, and in the sixth form, you were allowed to go to the girls' school, which was next door. So I suddenly became much more interested in going to the girls' school, showing off, not doing very much, and dreaming about forming my first bands, So I reckon maybe music journalism, and if I wasn't allowed to choose anything with music at all, I did over the years, I've had to do jobs to, keep being in bands. I knew my partner Rachel was upstairs, and one of the jobs that I had, which I didn't particularly like, and it's mental and it's random, but I worked for the Ministry of Agriculture for a while. And one of my jobs, every day, I had to work out this formula, which wasn't particularly difficult. It was like 2 sets of numbers to add up. And what that was the integrated lighting levels for chrysanthemums for that day. They have to have a precise amount of light per day. And not only did I have to work it out, I then had to pick up this phone, this Ministry of Agriculture phone, and speak it into like a speaking clock thing. So farmers could phone up, or horticulturists,
Yeah.
people from horticulture would phone up, and they'd hear my stupid voice going, the integrated lighting levels for chrysanthemums today is 7.6 or whatever it was. So maybe I could have found a career in that, because it was quite good fun.
Yes, well, yes. I've never heard that.
That's not an answer you're expecting, is it?
No, boys. That's interesting. But someone must still do that. Do you think someone still does that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think probably in the UK now, most of the chrysanthemums were imported from the Netherlands or something, because England doesn't make a lot, especially after Brexit. I imagine it's a bit of a shit show. But I reckon there will be some people somewhere who will probably have that wonderful accolade of speaking into some sort of recorded telephone thing. So, you know, I mean, even that was showing off, wasn't it? I was kind of trying to be. It's got something musical about that, even though I certainly wasn't singing. But you know, it's.
I can imagine you probably did sing it on the odd occasion.
I just did my best Barry White voice, you know, just husky. But yeah, I don't know. So I don't know. I reckon you're music journalism, and if not, I'd have done some mad thing with plants.
Thank you if you watched the whole interview in full. I really appreciate everyone who sticks around to the end of my videos. I just want to say thank you again to Simon for agreeing to come on the channel. I really enjoyed our chat, and I hope we can do it again sometime in the future. Once again, please subscribe if you haven't already, and also please keep an eye out for any future interviews that will be coming up. All the best. Thanks a lot.